Hello, and thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We are ready to begin. This webinar is part of the Nursing Faculty Prep webinar series sponsored by Lecturio. Today's webinar is eligible for one contact hour. Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. The speakers and planning committee members have disclosed no relevant financial relationships. To receive contact hours for this NCPD session, participants are required to attend the webinar and complete an evaluation form, which will be emailed via a link to all attendees 1 week after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via the Sigma repository within a few business days of recording. Following the presentation, if we have time, we'll have a question and answer session. You'll see on your Zoom webinar control panel that you can send a message through the Q&A feature. This is where you can type in any question you'd like to pose to our presenter. Be sure to hit send so the message makes it to us. Please use the Q&A for questions and the chat feature to interact with other participants. This webinar is proudly sponsored by Lecturio. Lecturio's products and services help nursing students learn to study effectively while empowering educators with valuable and actionable performance insights. Discover how Lecturio can enhance your teaching by visiting their website, lecturio.com/sigma. We'd like to thank our speaker for sharing her expertise with us today. Our speaker today is Dr. Julie Moe. Dr. Julie is a professor and undergraduate program coordinator at the University of Central Arkansas School of Nursing. She has been a nurse educator for 30 years and has experience teaching both online and in the traditional classroom. Dr. Moe is a certified nurse educator and currently serves as an advisor for the Sigma New Nurse Educator Academy, also known as NEDA. Welcome, and we'll turn it over to our speaker. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for that introduction and welcome everybody. It's so fun to see everyone joining and stating where you're from, and I can see that we have a wide variety. It's just an honor for me to be here today and to talk to you about challenges in the classroom. I think all of us are recognizing more and more that as we are facing this nursing shortage and this nurse educator shortage, that we have a lot of people coming into academia that may not have had the preparation as nurse educators. And it's kind of a steep learning curve if you haven't been prepared for that. So today, I hope to give you just a few things to think about as you begin to or continue to meet the challenges of nurse educators in the classroom. Our learning objectives for today, of course, will be to discuss factors related to student challenges in the classroom, but we can't simply focus on the students. We know that there are institutional and regulatory barriers that affect us, and there are also faculty challenges. And then of course, we hope to interject and to learn about strategies that we can use to reduce the barriers and facilitate nursing student success. Because the bottom line for all of us is student success, and that we can educate nurses so that they can enter the workforce and ultimately affect the health of the people that we serve. Next slide, please. So starting off with some factors affecting nursing student success. And this work comes from Brown in 2001, where she identified various modifiable and non-modifiable. I think all of us are familiar with the traditional non-modifiable factors such as age, gender, previous education that affect nursing students and their success in the classroom or in the program. However, I found this work to be quite interesting in that it helps us to understand that there are things that we can do as nurse educators to assist students in modifying those factors that we can modify. Starting off with attitudes towards assignments and learning, absolutely a modifiable factor. All of us have heard the terms that, oh, it was just a lot of busy work. Nurses don't really do care plans. Those kinds of comments. I think all of us have heard the groans when we present what we perceive as a very positive learning experience, like a group project, and we hear the groans of the students because, oh, they hate group work. But there are definitely some things that we can do as educators to change that attitude. Sometimes changing the attitude can make all the difference in student outcomes. For example, if we can really, we can't just say it once. I often tell new faculty, if you don't repeat something at least 3 times, the students are not going to hear you. That we have to link the relevance of what the students are doing with the assignment and how that affects their future nursing practice. Absolutely important. I actually teach a research course in which the students work in groups to complete an evidence-based practice project, and they come in absolutely with terrible attitudes. But we've designed the course so that we actually teach them how to work in teams. Very often we expect our students to collaborate and work in teams, but we don't necessarily give them the tools to do that. So breaking assignments into smaller chunks, giving them time in class to do that work together, giving them feedback, and then holding them accountable. I tell the students that everyone in the group is accountable for the product, and everyone in the group will get the same grade because they all have to be accountable, which means they all have to contribute and they all have to read the assignment that's being contributed. Very often on the first iteration, that doesn't really hit home until the grading and feedback occurs. Then after that, they get on task. I found that the biggest impact in changing attitudes towards group work is actually giving the students time in class to do that work. So that's one thing we can do. And then, of course, measuring those outcomes, doing the peer evaluation, and then really looking at how are the teams working together, and then giving them feedback and helping them to overcome the challenges that they face if someone's not contributing or contributing in the same way. So that's just one thing. Motivation to learn, absolutely a modifiable factor. I think all of us are facing the reality of generational differences in motivation to learn. We have a difference in motivation to learn in students that are currently, particularly those who have come out of the COVID lockdown era. And what I would perceive when I first started 30 years ago, and then we have a difference between our faculty and our students. Many of our students are very point driven, and faculty are really wanting students to be intellectually curious. But how do we get them there? Sometimes we have to attach points to things in order for them to value that activity. And it's sort of like a reward, like a payment. So that's just a reality that we know that there is a difference. There are differences in motivation to learn, but we can certainly help students to do that. The more relevant we make the learning activity, the more relevant we connect it to essential competencies of the RN in their future job, the more motivated students will be to learn. Academic and study skills. Students come with a variety of academic and study skills. Many of our students in nursing programs are high achievers prior to entering nursing. And I think all of us have experienced the students who are very high achievers who sort of hit a brick wall because we move from learning to pass exams and memorization to application. And often they're not necessarily prepared for that. Some students come to us with less than adequate preparation. So again, we have to get them up to speed. Some of the things that have helped us to assist students is creating some mock study sessions and actually teaching them how to study in groups, that when teaching other students, you learn more yourself. And because what we hear is students will say, oh, I study alone. I don't like to study in group because it doesn't work for me. And often you have to have that difficult conversation and say, well, what you're doing is not working for you currently. So let's try something new. Let's think about, studying in a group where we talk about it out loud so that you might remember when you go to take a test, I remember so-and-so talking about that in the study group. It might help them learn better. So that's been very helpful for us. The other thing in terms of academic and study skills that I am becoming very passionate about is we've seen a big switch to electronic resources away from paper textbooks and traditional textbooks. And what we're hearing from the textbook providers is that students prefer that. What I tend to hear from the students is the opposite. Of course, people tell us, well, the students don't read. Well, what we're finding is that they're really not reading the online resources. And it's not just the text. We have abundant electronic resources for the students. But if the students don't use those resources, then they're not going to be very effective. So that for me has been the biggest challenge in the last couple of years with this major switch to electronic resources is how do we get the students to use those resources? Of course, attaching points to it helps, and they will do it. However, I've also heard from students that say, oh yeah, I went on and I just keep clicking so it gets to the end so I get my points. So I can't say that I have a complete solution for that, but I think being aware of that and talking to the students about that if their resources are electronic, just because they have them doesn't mean it's going to work for them. We have a long way to go to really connect, and I'm not sure the evidence is yet available on the efficacy of those electronic resources for all students. Of course, we see a wide variety. Students are facing information overload. Part of our job as nurse educators is to help them understand which information is the key for them and to learning. So not necessarily to throw everything in the kitchen sink into a single module, but to help them filter out the nice to know, the need to know, and the must know in order for them to be effective. Previous life experience and work experience, we definitely see that affecting students' success and their attitude toward the program. Unfortunately, that's not modifiable. We can't go back and change their life experience. If they had negative educational experiences, that will definitely affect their trust with faculty and what our expectations are of them. So that's something we have to acknowledge and help students work through and create a culture of trust between faculty and students. And the closer we can get our objectives for our modules and our content to match our assessment outcomes, the better trust the students will have in us. That's what I've found, that they trust us if they believe the learning experience and the evaluation of that experience is fair. We've talked about previous life experience. Personal perceptions about skills is something I'm seeing more and more, and almost a dichotomy. I see students who come in who have very overinflated perception of their abilities, and students who have this imposter syndrome. And both of them need help. At my university, we have an honors college, which is a wonderful place that helps students to really explore thinking. And then when they come to us, they question everything. And they don't quite understand that the science of nursing is not necessarily up for debate all the time. So that's something that I've had a challenge with some students in that, well, I'm an honors college student and I'm very smart and I usually make A's, and why are you giving me feedback that's negative? So that's a challenge. A lot of our students, I'm sorry, my light goes off if I don't move. A lot of our students come in and their life experience has taught them to not use their voice. And so some of our students certainly need encouragement to use that voice and to speak up and to be to advocate for themselves and their own and what they need for success in school. Knowledge about support mechanisms and structures within the university, the college, or the school is very important. Sometimes our students need those resources. I think about tutoring, writing support, testing accommodations has certainly become very big. We have lots and lots of testing accommodations in the lower levels of education. Students often come to the university and think that they don't need. We have students who have learning problems, attention problems, who are very, very bright, who got through school with those supports and then come to college and believe that they don't need them anymore, when in fact, if they really could use them and be more successful. So getting them in touch with those supports is important. We've also found student mental health services have been vitally important in the last few years, particularly since the pandemic, in helping students to navigate the stressors that they're perceiving right now. We have students who come hungry. Our college has established a food pantry for students so that we can make sure that they're fed, because they learn better when they have a full stomach. So those are a few things. Sometimes having a conversation with the student to understand what is going on in their life, sometimes we can help connect them with the resources they need in order to be successful in school. And then, of course, we have things on here about stress, perceptions of stress, stress management, self-awareness of that stress. I tell students the biggest stressor is not being completely prepared. And that if we can figure out some study strategies that they will feel more prepared and less stressed. However, and we'll talk about some other disparities that affect student stress, and it's a real thing. But having those conversations with students can certainly help them acknowledge what those stressors are, and then help them change the things that are modifiable. For example, if they're working too much, if they're hungry, we can help that. If they are too involved in activities such as the sorority or athletics, we can help them figure out how to manage some of that to decrease those stressors so they have more time to study. So again, sometimes it just takes a conversation. I'm going to jump down here to learning styles, because students come to us much more aware of various learning styles. And how many of you have heard, oh, that doesn't fit my learning style, so I'm checking out here. And what I like to tell students is, it's important to know your predominant learning style, but it's not the faculty's responsibility the burden is not completely on the faculty. I tell students, I like to create a playground. I like to create a variety of learning strategies in the classroom and outside the classroom. And then it's up to the student to avail themselves of the activities that best meet their learning style, but it doesn't exclude the things that they struggle with a little bit more. So yes, reading material is always going to be important. If you can find a video that is audio and visual, that's wonderful. If you can create a kinesthetic strategy, that's great too. And we include all of those, but you can't simply, if you're a kinesthetic learner, you can't exclude the reading material. That's just not going to work. And then finally, this last student factor I'm going to talk about here is the perception of the relevance of the content to nursing. And I think all of us in education at the undergraduate level particularly have heard students say, well, the nurses in the clinical setting, we don't really do that. And, things like health policy or research, they really focus on what I call those sexy skills, like starting an IV or giving the meds or putting in a Foley catheter. And they tend to not perceive the relevance of those other things, which really will make them the best nurse if they are best problem solvers, if they can work in a team, if they have good time management skills, if they have good leadership skills. So it's those courses sometimes that make the best nurses that we really have to show them the relevance to their future career. This is very interesting, and I find that particularly since the COVID pandemic, this is work by Gudo in 2021. We've all heard about the social determinants of health, and this really is taking in that and really looking at social determinants that affect achievement gaps in education. And this comes from secondary education rather than higher education, but I really believe it's applicable in that we have a lot of digital tools and a lot of electronic resources, but I come from Arkansas, and not every place in Arkansas has the same bandwidth or availability of internet access. So students, even if we can do some remote teaching, don't necessarily have the same access. So that affects their achievement. There's some economic and structural divides that also affect students' achievement, and the cultural divide. Are they the first in their family to go to college? Do they have good self-regulation skills? So I thought this model really helps to explain some things that we're seeing in terms of achievement gaps. I've been teaching here for over 30 years now, and the students are coming with burdens that I would say we didn't really see 30 years ago. We have 20-year-olds who are caring for parents and grandparents. They have family responsibilities way beyond their years, which certainly affects achievement gaps. We have students with chronic health problems. Our healthcare for children with chronic health problems has improved in the last 30 years. So we have children with congenital heart disease that are now in our nursing program. I have one student now who had a heart transplant as a newborn and had a kidney transplant as an adolescent, who's now in my program. I had another student who had open heart surgery for a valve replacement, and he ended up having to withdraw for a semester because he was having some health problems related to that, and he came back. But those health problems, it's physical health problems, but also mental health problems. I've had more students withdraw temporarily because of mental health and physical health problems that they just couldn't overcome in the semester as they were ongoing. So that's something for us to think about. More of our students are employed full-time as they're trying to navigate school because of they're trying to fund their school. And then natural disasters, no matter where you live, whether it's hurricanes or tornadoes or blizzards or ice storms or earthquakes, our students are affected. Just recently, we had a tornado here in Arkansas, and one of my students had just finished a community health course and was certified in disaster response. And she ended up pulling off the interstate into a Kroger. The tornado hit the Kroger, took the roof off. One of the ladies in the Kroger was impaled. And this student, 20-year-old, helped to organize the response for that natural disaster. As it turns out, her own home was destroyed. So there's so many things that affect our students that really are outside the education realm that we have to recognize and have those conversations. And as we move on to the next slide, I just want to say all of those are so important. And then I need to touch on cheating because we're seeing it's sort of the big elephant in the room is cheating. And I don't know of anybody in academia, and if we could advance to the next slide, please, who's not touched by it. And, you know, I've had conversations with students, and a lot of time they don't really think about what they're doing as cheating. We've seen everything from students who are memorizing questions. Each student is assigned a question. They come out of the test and then they recompile the test. We know that students have access to some of the standardized exams, ATI, Kaplan, and they get those. Students have been known to write answers in their tattoos, on their fingernails. When we talk to them, very often they don't perceive what they're doing as cheating. So having a conversation about academic integrity is vitally important. Teaching about digital responsibility. A couple of years ago, in the same class, I had two students submit the same paper. And of course, we called them both in and they insisted that they had not shared or, you know, but what ended up happening is both of them had gotten a copy of this paper from a previous student the year before, and then submitted it. So again, the digital age has created a lot more opportunity for students to copy and paste, to purchase papers, to access test banks. So some of the things that we've done to minimize that is we do have an anti-cheating pledge. We encourage our faculty to create different versions of assessments. Sometimes it can be as simple as changing which distractor is correct. Of course, randomizing the questions if you can, or randomizing the distractors also can help. We have strict testing policies in which students are assigned a seat on the day of the test. Of course, they can't bring in anything besides, we do computerized testing, besides their computer, which is once they get into the test, it's offline. One of the things I think as faculty, we're guilty of is it takes time to create a good assessment. And sometimes we use those for many, many years in a row. So we have to be able to change those assessments in order to decrease the risk of cheating. And then limiting access to personal devices, that's sort of a given. And then having clear consequences and sticking with those consequences if students are guilty of cheating. So we've talked about factors related to students. We've talked about the elephant in the room of cheating, but there are also some institution and regulatory factors that challenge us as nurse educators in delivering programs. Nursing programs are very expensive. And I believe everybody has, because of the nursing shortage, we've been pushed to increase enrollment. So we have the same number of faculty right now compared to 30 years ago when we were admitting 30 to 35 students per cohort. I might have 2 extra faculty positions and I'm up to 126 students per cohort. So faculty are being asked to do a whole lot more. And while when we're in the classroom, we can teach students in large groups, the coordination of getting those students in clinical sites or in the sim lab have become extremely complex. And so funding for faculty salaries certainly has not helped that. Currently, faculty salaries are lower than a new nurse RN. So it's difficult to recruit faculty into academia from the clinical side because of that. Yes, we have lots of capability with simulation and other technology, but all of that is very expensive. And where do those costs go? And yes, we can write grants for soft money to purchase some of that, but the ongoing maintenance of that equipment, the personnel to run the equipment is certainly a challenge. And then, of course, with increased enrollment, we've seen space concerns in classrooms. We recently moved into a new building, and within a year, our classes have outgrown our classrooms. So we have to separate them into two cohorts, which actually is better. I prefer to have 65 in a group rather than 126. But all of those things are really tied to funding for nursing programs, nursing faculty, facilities, equipment, maintenance of that equipment. And certainly that's a challenge for all of us. And we're being asked to address those challenges by writing grants at the same time that we are trying to prepare students for the workforce. Those of you in undergrad, actually across the board, undergraduate or graduate education, the availability and access to clinical sites as nursing programs around the country have expanded enrollment has become a challenge. The onboarding process for students is cumbersome and always changing, particularly through the COVID era. It seemed like every day we were getting new regulations, new requirements of the students of our programs. We have, that there's access. Once we get into the site, we have concerns with access to charting, access to Pyxis and medication administration. And the clinical side is wanting our students to be job ready, yet we have difficulty accessing the tools to help the students become job ready. So again, a challenge that we're always confronting and always trying to work with our clinical partners about. At the graduate level, certainly access to preceptors is a very important concern and a challenge. Some places have gone to compensating preceptors. In Arkansas, we do not do that yet, but I believe that may be something coming down the pike. And then, of course, we have state regulations, national requirements, certification and accreditation requirements that challenge us. Recently, the AACN new nurse essential competencies really upended, particularly master's level programs for nurse educators. Ironically, if the essentials are really driving those programs to include more, and sometimes driving them to be eliminated, and that's a concern and a certain challenge. One of the things that is also a challenge from as the undergraduate program coordinator, we have some students who I definitely believe would be really, really good nurses. However, they have difficulty with the amount that is delivered every semester. Part of that is driven by scholarship requirements that require 15 credit hours, state requirements that require students to finish in 4 years or encourage them to finish in 4 years. And so students are taking 15 credit hours in order to meet their scholarship requirements, yet academically they're struggling. If we could get them to back off of the 15 credit hours, we probably could get them to the end of the program and be successful and be good nurses. Yet the 15 credit hours is required for their funding. So that's a challenge that I don't know how to navigate. Sometimes it results in the student not being successful and losing their scholarship. And if they can stay enrolled somehow, we can get them to the end. But I just wanted to point out that that's a factor that certainly is a challenge. Not every student who can manage the rigor of 15 credit hours of nursing courses every semester. If we could move on to the next slide. Finally, is the factors related to nurse educators. We can't have a conversation about challenges without that. I think all of us have seen that there are fewer of us who are prepared as nurse educators with, and thankfully we have webinars such as this or academies such as the Nurse Educator Development Academy with Sigma that help those of you who are transitioning from the clinical side into academia to learn about curriculum, instructional design and teaching, and evaluation and measurement. I know as a clinician, I taught a lot of parents. I was a newborn ICU nurse. I taught a lot of parents and families. Teaching was part of my job, but I never was responsible for creating curriculum, for meeting certain competencies, for developing various strategies of instructional design for 126 undergraduate students, or designing an online course for graduate students. I never was responsible for creating measurement and evaluation tools to learn to know if students are meeting competencies. So I applaud you for attending and encourage you to continue to seek ways to learn about those, because that will make all the difference as you face the challenges in the classroom. If you can really get the nuts and bolts of nurse educator in terms of designing curriculum and assuring that the competencies, because I think, and I'm guilty of it as a new nurse educator, my clinical experience in high-risk newborn, that's all I wanted to talk about. I absolutely 30 years ago spent much more time talking about high-risk newborn, when for a generalist RN BSN graduate, it should be very, very small. And so it took me time to learn that I couldn't just focus on what I liked. I had to really go by the competencies that are required of new nurse educators, of new nurse graduates. Heavy workloads of nurse educators face heavy workloads, whether you're teaching online or traditional face-to-face. Most of us have a lot of responsibilities. We have clinical responsibilities, simulation and lab responsibilities. As an undergraduate program coordinator, I really am sensitive to the fact that not every faculty can be experienced in every single one of these. I do have faculty who really focus on the sim lab and creating those simulations and getting students through. And then I have faculty who really love going back into clinical with the students. And then of course, all of us are, developing traditional and online teaching strategies. I think we've all seen the trends in terms of the nurse educator workforce, with fewer PhD prepared nurse educators and more DNP. So that means we have more clinicians coming in. Some places are designed for that, with promotion and tenure and promotion for DNP faculty, but smaller institutions, I happen to be from one. I don't work at a health science center. We had to create a way to, in the traditional promotion and tenure process for our DNP faculty. And I'm happy to say that we were able to do that because that was the only way for promotion and increased compensation. We're challenged by the practice requirements of certification bodies for our DNP nurse practitioner faculty, particularly as they transition into academia and are learning about curriculum and essential competencies and instructional design and creating rubrics and exams that they then have to have a certain number of practice hours, in order to maintain certification. So that's a challenge, as it's like why does everybody have to do everything, and how much can we expect from our nurse educators? So again, I don't necessarily have answers for all, but I think identifying those challenges and then beginning to think and just saying, yes, that is a challenge. If our accrediting bodies are requiring all this, then maybe we need decreased teaching loads for those faculties. And how do we make that happen within the structure of, what the university requires of every faculty member? So those are things we all work with. Moving on to the next slide, please. So evidence-based factors that contribute to student success, and this comes from Cooper in 2017. So the more directed and helping students have a goal and know how to achieve that goal. I think these are factors, these evidence-based factors that help students achieve success. The second factor, helping students to stay focused. I've had many difficult conversations with students who were not successful in a particular semester in helping them stay focused on their ultimate goal of becoming a nurse and helping them to understand that just because the path to that goal may need to change or must need to change, the goal doesn't necessarily need to change. And we can help them get there once they understand that they need to stay focused on the goal, even if the path to that goal changes. Students need to feel nurtured. Students want to feel like somebody wants to help them succeed. So personal relationships with students, helping simple things like knowing their names. One of the things I've done in my younger years, I was able to learn student names pretty quickly. As classes have expanded and I've gotten older, I can't do that anymore. And so I have name cards, big ones that sit on the tables in front of the students so that I can call on them by name. And that seems to make a big difference. We actually have students wear name tags and then they have to be visible to class so that if they approach me, I can quickly look at their name and address them by name. And that they just want to feel like somebody cares about their success. I do caution my faculty, though, that does not mean you have to be their mother, because they have a mother, most of them. And it doesn't mean that we need to be their friend. And we can go into the impact of social media and the effect that that has on students and faculty. And I just tell faculty, no, don't, we shouldn't be friending students on social media. We don't need to know what they're posting. We shouldn't be posting much, related to school anyway. And so that's something. So helping students feel nurtured, cared about, having conversation, asking about, how are you doing? What do you need? Can help them be successful. I agree. Someone just posted about not being friendly, but not their friend. And that is the key. We want to support them. We want them to trust us, to feel supported, but friendship goes beyond that. We want students to feel engaged. So our responsibility as faculty is creating active participation in class, whether that's small group work. And what I find is most helpful is to present maybe 10 minutes of content. Then we have an activity. Maybe they're working on a case study or they're analyzing information from lab work. And then we have a discussion about it. They discuss in their small group, and then we bring it to the larger group. The more we keep them engaged in the learning process, the more successful they can be. And then connected. Students want to feel connected as part of the college community. And so that goes to, what kinds of things do we have to help them be connected, whether it's nursing student organizations. Some of them are connected through campus activities, but it's identifying those students who seem to be isolated that we can really help improve their success by helping them be connected. One thing I found with our nursing students is they do sort of advance in cohorts, and they tend to find that connectiveness in the nursing program because they're with those students from beginning to the end. Most of them are. And then valued students' skills, talents, abilities. We have students who come from all walks of life who have contributed to the community of the university, to the town. We have athletes in nursing. Recognizing those things that they're doing outside of nursing can really highlight their skills and really make them feel connected. We have awards that we give out if nurses in the clinical setting comment on certain students, or we get letters from patients that students have been taken care of in the clinical setting. We'll make a big deal out of it. We call it Bravos, and we have a Bravo board. We post it on social media under the School of Nursing social media page to recognize those students when they go above and beyond what is expected. Moving on to the next slide. So some of the qualities that students have said contribute to their success is faculty who have, solid clinical experience and clinical knowledge and bring that to the classroom. I tell my new faculty that your job is to create a clinical picture for the students. And instead of presenting disease process, present the people who have the disease and help the students understand that they're taking care of people first. And then once we understand the people, once we learn about people, then we want to know how is that disease process affecting the people, the family, the community. Students recognize our education and our drive for continuous learning. They know if, the things that we've been involved in. They appreciate good leadership skills. And good leadership in the classroom means control of that classroom, that we have to recognize when there are students who are monopolizing and learn how to, not call them out, but to help them understand they have to allow others to participate. Students truly appreciate the ability to teach. And again, it's that ability to create that clinical picture for the students so that it's not just about memorizing words or dates or values, that we really teach them to understand, analyze the material. They appreciate good communication and people skills. And they want internal motivation and passion and professionalism. And then finally, I think I just wanted to highlight these core nurse educator competencies, the NLN competencies. And I think what I've found working with new faculty, that often new faculty experienced clinicians transitioning into academia from the clinical side aren't always aware that nurse educators are expected to achieve all of these competencies. And it's not simply creating a lesson and a PowerPoint in a classroom, that we are responsible for developing our students, socializing the students, that learner development and socialization, using assessment and evaluation strategies appropriately, participating in curriculum design. I happen to have several new faculty this year. And as those of you have been starting to map the new AACN essentials, it's a lot. And they come out of those meetings with their heads spinning, saying they just didn't ever realize how much we do to make sure that our curriculum is preparing students for the workforce, and how much goes into that in connecting the dots between the curriculum, the content, teaching learning strategies, and the evaluation outcomes, and how those all have to match in order to be effective and fair to the students. And then, of course, we engage in scholarship and function in the broader nurse educator environment. So I hope this gives you an overview of, the challenges in the classroom and some simple things that we can do. And I can't stress enough how much we can affect student success by paying attention to those student factors that affect their motivation, what's going on in their personal lives. Again, not to pry, not to be their friend, but to understand and to help them navigate. How do they overcome that in order to be successful? Because we need all of them. We need them in nursing. I think it looks like we do have about 10 minutes left over for questions. And I believe we have Lisa Anders is going to help us with that.
Yeah, Julie, thank you so much. I think your content is so on point, and we can see through the chat and the emojis that people are reacting well to the stuff that you are sharing in this webinar. I want to ask a question from an anonymous attendee. Because of the increased demand to enroll more students, have you changed your admission criteria? Our instructor is seeing an increase in students that do not have necessary underpinnings and often fail 2 courses within the fundamental level. What do you think about that?
One of the things that we've seen, because we've expanded in the last 3 years as we got a new building and bigger classrooms, we expanded our cohort from 75 to 125. Our admission criteria hasn't changed, but it's become, we're admitting students with lower GPAs because we're admitting more students. We admit the number of students we expect to graduate, and our attrition rate is pretty low. But yes, we are seeing students who are coming underprepared. We do have the policy that 2 failures and you're not eligible to continue. What we have done for students who are failing 2 in the same semester, we are actually asking them to appeal the policy and working with them to try to get them back in on a decelerated level. So only taking 1 or 2 courses at a time to help get them to the end. And that has worked. But again, that we're seeing more and more who are having trouble with that.
Yeah, and we see somebody posted in the chat that they're having to remediate new students with basic reading and math skills also.
We haven't seen that, but I imagine that's a big problem in some places.
So what do you think about LinkedIn or academic research focused Twitter accounts that are different than the traditional social media outlets with regard to student interaction? From the educator standpoint, what do you feel about those?
You mean, I guess my question is it from faculty to student? I have faculty who use Twitter accounts as part of a class, particularly in our health policy class. They use Twitter, particularly when the legislature is in session and at the same time the class is, to get the students up to date on this happened today. And I think that's an effective use of that particular technology. I don't use Twitter and I don't use LinkedIn. I prefer email is fine. What we found with the students, through our course management systems, of course, we have email, we have discussion. The students go other places. They are using a GroupMe to communicate with each other. And that's their choice. My complaint about that is if I get a question and the students say all the students want to know, I would prefer that come through the course so that I can respond and all the students get the response at the same time. They don't take my they don't follow that advice from me at all. They don't want to use the learning management system discussion board. They prefer to use GroupMe, and I don't want to be part of their GroupMe.
Yeah, and I think that is very understandable, especially when the organization or the school provides adequate learning dashboards or whatever LMS system you have to facilitate those conversations so all the students get the same content.
I just saw one content that said the students don't check their email, except they expect you to check it when they have emailed you at 2 o'clock in the morning and you haven't responded by 4 o'clock in the morning. They want to know why.
So this, we've had a couple of comments in regards to these strategies for, the standard RN student or the younger student, but what about the older student or grad entry or accelerated NP students? Do you think that the strategies you talked about today apply across the board?
I do. And I think even in an online environment, I know most of our graduate programs are primarily online. They come on campus for, like interprofessional activities or laboratory things. I do think there are some online strategies to help students feel connect. In fact, I think they're vitally important. We see that with our RN to BSN students who are primarily online. They don't necessarily feel a part of. So we have built in some, and it's asynchronous mostly, but ways for them to connect with each other. We require group work of them so that they do feel connected and supported, because I think anyone who's been in an online education program understands, and we've learned that from COVID as well, that it can feel very isolating. and you feel like you're out there by yourself. And you're wondering, and it really makes you question your academic ability, because it's, it takes longer. Anyway, yes, I do think that all of those things are important. We have graduate students who are dealing, managing, chronically ill children, job, ill parents or grandparents, or the amount that many of our students are handling is really, really amazing.
Yeah, and with that being said, as a seasoned faculty member, this question came up for you in the chat. What solutions do you have with all the remediation, the extra workload, more students, etc., to keep seasoned faculty from burning out and retiring early?
Oh, that's a big one.
And it will probably be our last question for today.
Yes. First of all, I would say May is the best month to be a nurse educator. It seems like we do get a bit of a break at this time of the year. I actually think I don't necessarily I think we have to create boundaries for ourselves. I think we are responsible for creating some of those boundaries, and we can't save them all. I think there are certainly some strategies we can do, but the burden is not completely on us. The students have to do their part as well. And sometimes we have to be willing to let them go, as long as we can be confident that the way we're delivering content matches the competencies that we're trying to achieve, that our evaluation methods are fair and consistent with what how we've been teaching the students. That is so important, that all of those things connect.
Yes, I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of the questions. So you can see in the chat box that Julie did allow us to share her contact information. So please feel free to email Julie if you have any additional questions or want to continue to connect after this webinar. We thank you so much for sharing all of this great information with our attendees today. Sigma is grateful that you took the time to share with the audience, and we definitely look forward to hearing more from you in the future. We hope that you enjoyed this webinar. As a reminder, 1 week from today, you will receive an auto-generated email from Zoom to the email address that you registered for the webinar, and that will include a link for you to complete the evaluation for your nursing continuing professional development certificate. Be sure to check out Sigma's upcoming webinars, podcasts, and resources to support you and your colleagues at sigmanursing.org. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next webinar in the Nursing Faculty Prep webinar series, proudly sponsored by Lecturio. We hope to see you there. Have a wonderful day.